Hello, Roddy here. So today I'm gonna be practicing my English to talk about this book and what I've learned from this book. Okay, so I'm not a philosophy expert or anything like that, and as I've said, I'm just here to practice my English. But of course, I cannot, speak in English if I have nothing to talk about. So, in order for me to speak in English, I have to have something to talk about. So today I've decided to, talk about this book, and what I've learned from this book and how this book has helped me learn English in some ways. Right. So again, this book is the title of this book is Discourses and Selected Writings by Epictetus. Okay. So I'm not gonna delve deep into who Epictetus was, or nothing historical. Okay, we're not gonna be doing anything historical here. We're not gonna be talking about history. But again, I'm just going to be talking about what I've learned from, again, this book. Now, Epictetus, okay, Epictetus in this book talks about the power of the mind. And when I say power of the mind, I don't mean anything supernatural. Okay, nothing supernatural, nothing magical, but something commonsensical, something that you and I and everyone else can understand. Okay, so Epictetus tells us that here's the mind, okay, or the rational faculty. He calls it the rational faculty. So here is the mind, or the rational faculty. And here are everything else that exists outside of the mind, or the rational faculty. So think about it this way. So let's have the mind, and then something that exists outside of the mind. Let's have English, for example, okay? So English, especially English grammar, it tells us the words that we ought to use or must use in order to refer to objects or events precisely. So for example, if I want to talk about, let's say, my smartphone, I have to use the word smartphone. So if I say, this is my smartphone, then the message is clear. The message represents what I'm talking about. So that's the purpose of English grammar, English vocabulary, and everything else of that sort. And so that's the value of English grammar and everything English, basically. English vocabulary, English semantics, English linguistics, so the list goes on. Okay? So here is the mind, the rational faculty, and here is English. Now, English tells us how to write and speak, what to write and speak, how precise we ought to be in order for us to be understood as and it also helps us to understand others. Okay, so again, English, just like any language really, allows us to understand others and to be understood ourselves. Okay, so that's what English is. But then here is the mind again, and here is English. English doesn't tell you when to speak. It doesn't. English doesn't tell you whether or not you should speak in English at all. It does, English doesn't tell you anything other than the rules of the English grammar, English vocabulary, all those things. But it doesn't tell you whether or not you should speak in English, or whether or not you should speak in English in a particular time or in a particular way, or whether or not you should speak in English or with respect, or whether you should be rude when you're speaking in English. It doesn't. English doesn't tell you that. Only the rational faculty tells you whether or not you should speak in English, or whether or not you should speak in English when you're communicating your thoughts on YouTube, or whether you should like speak in English in a very polite way. Only the rational faculty tells you that. So, how does this help us? How does this help me in particular? So, for example, if I were preparing for the IELTS exam now, how would I use this lesson from Epictetus? I would distinguish what is within my control from the things that are not within my control. So, for example, whether or not I would practice and learn English is something that I can control. Okay? That's something that I can control. Whether or not I would use YouTube to practice my English, or maybe just watch random videos, that's something that is within my power. That's something that I can control. Okay? So these are some of the things that I can practice, can do, because it's all within my power. So in this case, what would be the things that are not within my power? So let's say the actions of the examiner would not be within my control. They could speak in whatever way they like. But then, how I would speak, what I would say, and how I would prepare, or whether or not I would even prepare for the exam at all, are things that are within my control or power, really. Okay? So, the lessons from this book, because there are many of them really. I've been rambling a lot, right? So the lessons from this book are really useful, not just in learning English, but how we treat ourselves and the world, and how we exercise power. Because let's face it, there are many things that are not within our power. So for example, whether or not others would like to even listen to you or speak with you in English is not something that you can control. Because if they didn't want to speak with you, then there's basically nothing you can do. It would be like weird for anyone to force anyone else to speak with them, right? And so the will and the desires of others are not within your power. But your desires are within your power. Okay, you can work on those. So again, it's the same in English. Whether or not we, whether or not we would even want to use YouTube in order to improve our English and learn English is something that we can control. It's something that we can control. But, whether or not our teachers would give us difficult exams in English, or easy ones, or maybe extremely unfair ones, is not really within our power. Okay, it's within their power, not our power. Okay, we could influence them, okay, to a certain degree, I think, but if they really didn't want to, then it would be a hopeless situation. We would only have to focus on, the things that are within our control. So those are the things that I've learned from Epictetus, and how I think we could, if we wanted to, apply the lessons from this book. So I suggest you to read this book. Really, it's good. It really is good. Okay, thank you very much for listening.